And I don't know, it's an interesting study, I think. Reading again yesterday, I would encourage, I put it in my notes even, go back and read chapters 19 and 20 of Second Chronicles. You know, it's just good reading. If you hadn't read something in a while, you kind of, if you're like me, you forget. But very, very interesting reading in comparison to what the lesson we're going to look at today. I keep going in. So I don't know if it's me, it's the wire. I just won't touch anything. I'll try to do that. But the title of our lesson this morning is Compromising and Wicked Kings. So we came out of lesson 4, and the Lord was dealing there with Ahab. There in verse 25, it said, "But there was none like unto Ahab, which did sell himself to work wickedness in the sight of the Lord, whom Jezebel his wife stirred up." And we're going to see a little bit of a trend, I think, when we look at the King Jehoshaphat and some of his life. An interesting life that he was able to live and to serve the Lord even. But as I was going through this, and I'll ask you all, like I say, I may get ahead of myself because there was just so much that you just come across as you go through this. How many of y'all have ever known somebody that, boy, you just look at them and they had it together, they just were doing well, everything they touched went right. But they had one thing about them that was a character flaw, and it was just something that it would just wreck everything, all the good that they had done. Have y'all saw people like that? That they had just, I call it a character flaw, or a fault that they had in their character. And I've known people that were just ridiculously talented over the years. You know, you thought, well, they could do anything they wanted to do, and they could take that talent and use it. And sometimes they would, but they had that flaw, they had that weakness, and it just seemed to at times it would ruin everything they had done, or it sometimes even it would just ruin them. And that's kind of what we'll see with Jehoshaphat. That he was if you look at his life, he was a good king. I mean, he wanted to do what was right, but he had some flaws in his character. And I read back there about Ahab. Well, Ahab, he had some definite flaws, decided flaws, you would say, that he made up his mind that he was going to do some things. So a lot of the same characteristics, very similar in the two. So we're going to look at two kings that compromised with evil, and how that influenced their sons to become wicked kings. So Ahab, he was Israel's king. We read in our last lesson that he was humbled after Elijah told him that he would die, but then he became very humble, and God withheld that. But Ahab, it didn't last, did it? He went back to his old ways, and that was just who he was. So he was going to return to his evil ways. So again, I've already told you, go back and read chapters 19 and 20 and get a good picture of who Jehoshaphat was. But he was, by what I can read, we would have said, well, he was a good king. And that was a very rarity, really, in the picture of the kings of Israel. But he made an alliance with an ungodly king, Ahab. That was Israel's king there, and that's in chapter 22. So they were both going to go to war with their warriors, and they're going to go against Syria. So they had a common adversary. And that's kind of what the thought was. They went into this alliance together, and that was probably maybe part of the reasoning on the part of Jehoshaphat as to why he did this. But in chapter 18, verse 28, and I want to read something, though, first, because we're going to look at Ahab. We're going to look at his ending. There's going to be a prophet by the name of Micaiah, and he's going to prophesy pretty much the end for Ahab. But they have asked the other prophets, what's your take on this? And the other ones, they prophesied, well, good, you're going to come out victorious. You're going to be okay. But I liked what was said, or Micaiah said, in chapter 18, verse 13, it says, "And Micaiah, he said, As the Lord liveth, even what my God saith, that will I speak." So he wasn't going to just play along and go along. He was going to do what God would have him to do. He was going to prophesy what God would have him to prophesy. And we will see that his prophecy comes true. So there in 2 Chronicles 18:28, "So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went up to Ramoth-Gilead, and the king of Israel saith unto Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself, and will go to the battle, but put thou on thy robes. So the king of Israel disguised himself, and they both went to battle." And a lot of this stuff, it just makes you stop and think, why would he do this? You know, who was going to be who was the enemy going to be looking for? You know, they say in battle, cut the head off and the body will die. Well, they were going to be looking for the king, weren't they? And Ahab knew this. He knew that that's what the enemy was going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for the king. So here he is. He's disguised himself. And Jehoshaphat, he's made it very obvious that he's a king. But he's not the one they're going to be looking for. But, well, he will be initially. So we'll see that. But what Ahab is trying to do, he's trying to outsmart God, was the way I put it. He's trying to hide himself from the prophecy that's been prophesied against him. He's thinking he'll just outsmart. I don't know, the only way I knew to say it is he's trying to outsmart God by doing this, by trying to disguise himself. So Ahab, again, he's told Jehoshaphat, you be who you are, you put on the robe as the king, I'm going to be disguised. And we know that kings were the prime targets in battle. And again, he didn't want to get killed. I don't think anybody, good or bad, wants to get killed. But in verse 30 there of chapter 18, it says, "Now the king of Syria had commanded the captains of the chariot," here's the enemy king, "had commanded the captains of the chariots that were with him, saying, Fight ye not with small or great, save only the king of Israel." So they're going into battle looking for the king of Israel, who they thought, who should have been Ahab. And they're not going to find him. Well, maybe they are. Unknowingly, they are going to find him. Y'all remember these stories, I guess, probably, don't you? I know a lot of them are familiar. And I was glad that I had some highlights. We had taught a similar lesson to this, I guess, a few years back. So I had some lingering notes, and it helped me. But he tells them not to fight. He says, "Fight ye not with small or great, save only with the king of Israel." And it came to pass, when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, that they said, "It is the king of Israel." Therefore they compassed him about him to fight. But Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him, and God moved them to depart from him. Isn't that amazing what God can do? I mean, I just read through this, and I don't have to comment. I mean, it just speaks for itself, how God protected this man. There was a question, one of the writers I'd read a little bit, why would Jehoshaphat do this? Was he just arrogant? And one of them was he just dumb, for allowing himself to be seen? Or did he just think, whatever's going to be is going to be? God, if God wants me to live, I'll live. I don't know his reasoning, but he had to call out to God, and God did. It said Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him and moved them to depart from him. So that's the first part of Ahab's plan that's been taken away, destroyed. So that's part one. And it says, "For it came to pass that when the captains of the chariots perceived that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back again from pursuing him." So again, Ahab had disguised himself. Jehoshaphat almost got killed, didn't he? I mean, he was on the verge in the heat of battle. They could have very well killed him, but God spared him. If he had not cried out to God, he would have, most likely, he would have been killed. But then in verse 33, and I always thought this was interesting, I guess from the first times that after I got in church, and we covered this. But in verse 33, it says, and a certain man drew a bow at a venture. And that word venture, I thought it was in, because I looked, I guess it was in Strong's. Brother Eddie, you may have a better, but the definition for the word venture there was such an odd definition. It was simplicity. It was innocence. And I thought, why? And I think it was just because this was what this man did. He was a warrior. And one writer talked about, well, there's no telling how many arrows he had shot that day at the enemy, but it's just out of simplicity, out of innocence, almost ignorance, he fired another arrow, and it found the mark. But it found the mark that God wanted to find. So I couldn't find anything different. Is that what you're understanding too? Okay. So I thought, well, sometimes you come across something that's just unusual, and why does it not make sense? But it's just interesting how God uses people at times that they don't even know that He's using them, and He used this warrior in that capacity to hit his target. And we're going to read about his target. Y'all think, well, come on, let's get to it. But it says he drew a bow at a venture and smote the king of Israel. Well, who was that? That was Ahab. He thought he'd got away, didn't he? He smote the king of Israel, but he didn't just smite him. He says he smote him between the joints of the harness. I mean, this had to be just right, because they went into battle. I mean, they were shielded up, and it had to hit him just right, and it did. It says, therefore he said to his chariot man, turn thine hand that thou mayest carry me out of the host, for I am wounded. And the battle increased that day. Howbeit the king of Israel stayed himself up in his chariot. So this tells you a little bit, of the, I don't know if there's a good word, but the toughness, I guess, maybe of Ahab. He did stay in the battle. So he says he stayed himself up in his chariot against the Syrians until the even, and about the time of the sun going down, he died. Now one of the writers I read, they said, well, the natural man would say, well, it just happened. Just happened. It's just odd coincidence. And then they went on to say, well, the man of faith would say God did it. I'm going to say God did it. God knew exactly where Ahab would be in that battle. And I don't know how he did it, well, he kind of pushed him into the path of that arrow. But anyhow, I believe that God did it. And I believe he did it. And it goes out to be true the prophecy that Micaiah said it was true. There in chapter 18, verse 27, it says there, and Micaiah said, if thou certainly return in peace, then hath not the Lord spoken by me. And he said, hearken, all ye people. He was going to be imprisoned. He had so angered the king that he was going to put him in prison for speaking against him. But he was right, wasn't he? His prophecy came true. And Ahab did not return living from the battle. So again, God has things into control. We just won't outsmart God. We don't get by with things, and that's not to say that God's out to get us, but when we do well, God rewards. And when we do evil, God, He handles the situation in the manner it needs to be handled. And that's not always through death. But for Ahab, it was. It was death. Now, boy, God had been gracious to him, hadn't he? I mean, he had let him slide there in the previous chapter, but now he's back to his old ways, and God is finally dealing with him. So the stray arrow hit Ahab, and we know that he died. He reigned for 22 years in Israel, the northern kingdom. That's a pretty long reign that he had. But now it's done. So we see in chapter 19, as we move into chapter 19, 2 Chronicles, verse 1, and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, returned to his house in peace to Jerusalem. And Jehu, the son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, he said, shouldest thou help the ungodly and love them that hate the Lord? Therefore is wrath upon thee from before the Lord. Nevertheless, there are good things found in thee, that thou hast taken away the groves out of the land and hast prepared thine heart to see God. So he had some things that God recognized as good characteristics about himself. Proverbs 16:1 says the preparations. Now, so it kind of gives God the credit, though. Anything good about him, it should be credited to the Lord. And Proverbs 16:1 tells us that the preparations of the heart in man and the answer from the tongue is from the Lord. So I guess I'd have to say if there's anything good from any of us, it's of the Lord. He allows that. And the same thing, I think, with Jehoshaphat here. So God saw some good things about it. And again, as you read through chapter 19 and look at his life, I mean, he did a lot of good things. But he had that character flaw in him. He wanted to make deals with people that he should have not been making deals with. And it's the same with us. So they asked the question of why he loved them that hate the Lord. And this was a warning to Jehoshaphat about compromise, how it had become a pattern for him in his life. And I put some notes for myself, so you kind of have to bear with me so I can read my own notes. But the words loved and hate here are not the emotional feelings. That's not what it's talking about. But it's talking about a treaty or a covenant. That type of love that he would have went into with this other king that he's going to go into this alliance with to go into battle with them. So that's kind of what it's referencing there. And we read, I have another reference I'm going to read real quick. Psalm 97:10. I'm kind of rattling along here. Again, I don't know. As I got to reading this, there was so much. There's no way I could cover it all. But Psalm 97:10 says, ye that love the Lord hate evil. He preserveth the souls of his saints. He delivereth them out of the hand of the wicked. But he gives, I think, some instruction there, doesn't he? He says, ye that love the Lord hate evil. And we should hate evil. We shouldn't want to have anything to do with evil. And he tells us the promise. He says, he preserveth the souls of his saints. He delivereth them out of the hand of the wicked. So rather than loving on the unrighteous king, he should have been doing what God would have had him to do. I'll lose my place, but we'll flip a page here in my lesson here, and we'll cover a little bit more. But he asked him again, he asked the question of why he loved them that hate the Lord. Again, this was a character flaw, I think, of his. Sometimes people will do things, they'll go into a business venture with somebody. And I've come across people that have done this. I've known good Christian people that would go into a relationship with somebody that was just an ungodly person. That's the only way you can say it. And they thought, well, we're just it's just a business relationship. That's all it is. I want to conduct business in the right way. And more often than not, the other side of that coin, it not ending well. The business, because it's two opposing thought processes. It's two opposing mindsets. And they just don't go. It's water and oil. I don't know. Maybe that's the way to put it. They don't go together. And that's what Jehoshaphat had a problem of doing. He would enter in alliances and compacts and covenants with people that they just didn't think the way they did. And I always use the example, and we'll read some scripture here about a saved person marrying an unsaved person. Well, God would not have us to do that. And that's not being mean. That's just being scriptural, because he knows that you've got two people. They just don't think the same. They don't value the same things the same way. It's just They're just different. I can say that, knowing that from being a lost person at one time. You don't value the same things. And you shouldn't enter into covenants or agreements with people that don't agree with the things of God. So our key verse is 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. Here, I think probably when I was a young Christian, I didn't start where everybody told me. I didn't start in the Gospel of John. I started in Corinthians. Good or bad, but I learned a lot. But he says here, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? Well, they don't have any. They just shouldn't be together. So we'll read on. We'll read these last few verses, and we'll be about it at our time. But 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 15 through 18, again he says, and what concord hath Christ with Belial? It's these questions. So he wants us to answer. I think it's best if somebody asks you a question, they get you to answer it. Because if you can figure out an answer, it'll be more important to you. It'll make more sense to you. And I'm glad he asked it as questions. He says, or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? He says, for ye are the temple of the living God, as God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and I will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. So Paul, he knew God's people needed to know God's will about yoking up. Now you think about, in my mind, a yoke of oxen. I've seen a team of mules work together. I don't think I saw any oxen, but I know years ago we were going up to Biltmore, and it was actually an 8th grade trip. And as we went up the mountain, there was an old farmer out there, and he had a yoke of mules pulling a plow. It was just a rare sight for us kids. But, they had to be in agreement, didn't they, to be able to work together. And so I think it's a lesson for us that we can't yoke up with something that is in disagreement with what God would have us to do. And he warns us against that, doing that. And our lesson we'll talk about, the things that we've saw the church do over the years. Different churches would try to yoke up together, but they're just in disagreement. Doctrinally, they're just in disagreement. And we just can't do that. So Paul wants them to be aware of yoking up or joining with infidels and the wrong crowd. This includes marriage. It talks about how believers are not to marry unbelievers. Again, that's not to be mean. And I know what happens, and I've saw it over the years, and it's thank God it's worked out. The one that was lost got saved. But we have to go what the Lord would have us to do. It says to do so can cause problems for both. And so it does. So I'm going to have to stop, but we'll look next at Jehoshaphat's problem. And I'll read the verse here until she buzzes me, and I'll have to stop then, won't I? But it says in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 35, it says, and after this did Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, join himself with Ahaziah, the king of Israel. This is the son of Ahab. He's went right back into the same family. And we'll find about some of the alliances of this. We'll find out who did Jehoshaphat, who was he married to. So it's interesting things. So his fault, again, we see here in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 12, and I wanted to read that. It says there, now I put this is the same man. Now this is a statement that Jehoshaphat made. He says, O our God, wilt thou not judge them? For we have not might against this great company that cometh against us, neither know we what to do, but our eyes are on thee. I read that because that gives you a little bit of a picture of what he was, what kind of person he was. He wanted to do right, I believe. He wanted to trust the Lord, but he had this character flaw, and it just ruined and overcame everything else that he tried to do that was good. So again, after Ahab passed away, after he died in battle, his wicked son Ahaziah, he reigned in Israel. And Jehoshaphat is a pattern, as his pattern was, he joined with the wicked king Ahaziah. So I'll stop there. I don't know if there was another buzzer. There it is, right on time. All right. Lord willing, we'll look into this. If Brother Randy wants me to continue, then that's what we'll do. I'd say this has been a, go back and read chapters 19 and 20. I'd encourage that. I'm going to do it myself too. Thank y'all.